Sometimes the worst night of your life becomes the night that changes everything. Ethan Brooks glanced at his phone for the third time in 10 minutes and already knew what the next message would say before he opened it. Standing near the entrance of one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants, the 42-year-old billionaire sighed as the notification appeared on his screen. His blind date had canceled. A last-minute emergency, according to the message. The apology seemed sincere enough, but it did not change the fact that he had cleared an evening from a schedule packed with board meetings, investor calls, and business travel only to find himself unexpectedly alone. Ethan slipped his phone back into his pocket and offered a polite nod to the hostess as he left the restaurant. The city air felt cool against his face. Downtown Chicago glowed beneath thousands of lights reflecting off glass towers and passing traffic. Most people imagined that billionaires lived exciting lives filled with endless opportunities and glamorous experiences. The truth was often much less interesting. Ethan had wealth, influence, and success beyond what he once imagined possible, yet nights like this reminded him how surprisingly lonely success could become. He walked toward the private parking area where his black luxury sedan waited beneath a row of decorative streetlights. His mind was already moving on to tomorrow's responsibilities when something unusual caught his attention. Near the front of his vehicle stood a woman. At first, he assumed she was simply passing by. Then he noticed she was not moving. She stood beside the car with her back partially turned, clutching something tightly against her chest. Her shoulders trembled slightly. Even from several yards away, Ethan could tell she was crying. He slowed his pace. The woman appeared to be in her early 30s. Her simple clothing looked neat, but worn from a long day. Chestnut brown hair framed a face that seemed exhausted even beneath the soft glow of the streetlights. She quickly wiped her eyes as though hoping nobody would notice. Ethan instinctively looked around the parking area. The sidewalks nearby were busy. Enough, yet somehow she seemed completely alone. For a moment, he considered continuing to his car without saying anything. After all, strangers cried for countless reasons. It was not his business. Then the woman lowered her head again, and something about the quiet sadness in her posture stopped him. There was no anger, no drama, just heartbreak. As Ethan stepped closer, the woman suddenly realized someone was approaching. Startled, she quickly brushed away tears and turned slightly away from him. In that brief movement, Ethan noticed a large sealed envelope pressed tightly against her chest, almost as though she was afraid someone might take it. Before he could say a word, she attempted to compose herself and looked toward the street as if preparing to leave. But the image stayed with him instantly. A canceled blind date no longer seemed important. Standing beside his car was a stranger carrying a mystery he could not explain. And for reasons he did not yet understand, Ethan found himself unable to walk away. The woman took a step away from the black sedan as if distance might somehow protect her from being noticed. Ethan stopped several feet away, careful not to appear threatening. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Are you okay?" The question seemed simple, but it immediately made her uncomfortable. She tightened her grip on the large envelope and forced a small smile that did not reach her eyes. "I am fine." Ethan had spent years negotiating billion-dollar deals and reading people across conference tables. He knew when someone was telling the truth. He also knew when someone was trying desperately to hide it. "You do not look fine," he replied. The woman looked down for a moment before quickly wiping away another tear. "It has been a long day." Ethan nodded. "I can see that." For a few seconds, neither spoke. Traffic moved steadily along the street nearby. Restaurant guests came and went beneath the warm glow of the entrance lights. The city continued moving while the two strangers stood frozen inside their own small moment. "I am sorry if I caused any trouble," the woman finally said. "I was just leaving." She turned slightly, as though preparing to walk away. Then a sudden gust of wind swept through the parking area. The envelope slipped from her grasp and nearly fell to the pavement. Instinctively, Ethan reached forward and caught it before it hit the ground. "Here," he said. Embarrassment flashed across her face. She accepted the envelope immediately and pulled it back against her chest. During the brief exchange, Ethan noticed that the paper was worn along the edges, as though it had been opened and closed many times. Whatever was inside clearly mattered. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You are welcome." Once again, silence settled between them. Ethan could tell she wanted to leave, yet something seemed to hold her in place. Her eyes looked exhausted. Not merely tired from a difficult day, but burdened by something much heavier. Finally, she glanced toward the restaurant behind him. You should probably get back to your evening. Ethan almost laughed. Actually, my evening did not go exactly as planned. For the first time, a faint hint of curiosity appeared in her expression. What happened? My plans were canceled. The woman nodded slowly. I am sorry. Do not be. Sometimes things happen for a reason. The words surprised even Ethan. He was not normally the type to speak that way. Yet standing here, looking at a stranger fighting back tears beneath city lights, he found himself believing it. The woman looked away before he could read her reaction. Her eyes drifted toward the envelope again. Whatever was inside seemed connected to everything she was feeling. Ethan considered asking about it, but stopped himself. Some questions belonged to strangers. Others required trust. He had not earned that trust. Not yet. My name is Ethan, he said instead. The woman hesitated. Then she finally answered. Rachel. The simple introduction somehow made the moment feel more real. No longer a stranger crying beside a car. Now she had a name. Rachel Turner. And although Ethan still knew almost nothing about her, one thing had become obvious. The envelope she was trying so hard to hide carried a story. A painful one. And for reasons he could not explain, he was beginning to wonder what that story might be. For a moment, it seemed as though Rachel might finally explain why she had been crying. Her lips parted slightly, and Ethan noticed a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. Then whatever thought had surfaced disappeared just as quickly. She shook her head and stepped back. Thank you for checking on me, but I really should go. Ethan could hear the wall she was trying to build between them. It was not hostility. It was self-protection. I understand, he said. But if you need help, there is nothing wrong with accepting it. Rachel gave a small, tired smile. That is kind of you. But I learned a long time ago that most problems are mine to solve. The answer lingered in the air between them. Ethan found himself studying her expression. There was determination there. Pride. The kind that often belonged to people who had spent years carrying burdens without anyone else's support. You do not have to tell me what is inside the envelope, Ethan said carefully. Rachel immediately tightened her grip on it. Good. Her response came faster than she intended. Realizing it, she softened her tone. Sorry, it is just personal. Ethan nodded. Fair enough. Another gust of wind swept through the street. Rachel glanced toward the bus stop across the avenue. Several people were already gathering beneath the shelter as the temperature continued to drop. Ethan noticed she was not carrying a coat heavy enough for the weather. Do you need a ride somewhere? He asked. Rachel immediately shook her head. No. Are you sure? Very sure. Ethan almost smiled. She answered every offer the same way. Firmly. Respectfully. Completely unwilling to depend on anyone. You do not make helping easy, he said. For the first time, Rachel let out a small laugh. It was brief, but it transformed her entire face. Beneath the exhaustion, Ethan caught a glimpse of someone warm and genuine. Then the moment vanished. Rachel looked down at her watch, and concern immediately returned to her expression. I really need to leave. Ethan followed her gaze. Whatever awaited her was clearly important. All right. Rachel nodded. Thank you again for being nice. As she turned toward the sidewalk, a folded piece of paper slipped partially out of the envelope. Rachel hurried to push it back inside before Ethan could see much of it. Still, he noticed enough to know it appeared official. There were printed logos, signatures, and several highlighted sections. Rachel caught his glance and immediately looked away. The reaction confirmed what Ethan already suspected. The envelope contained something serious. Something painful. Something she did not want anyone else seeing. Take care of yourself, Rachel, Ethan said. She paused for a second before answering. You too, Ethan. Then she walked away into the evening crowd. Ethan remained beside his car long after she disappeared from view. He told himself the encounter was over. A random meeting between two strangers whose lives would never cross again. Yet he could not stop thinking about her. About the tears she tried to hide. About the envelope she guarded so carefully. About the sadness that seemed far too heavy for one person to carry alone. As he finally climbed into his car, he glanced one last time toward the busy sidewalk. Rachel was gone. But the mystery she left behind had only grown stronger. Rachel tried to convince herself that the encounter meant nothing. By the time she reached her apartment later that evening, Ethan Brooks was simply another stranger she would probably never see again. Life had taught her not to expect miracles, and certainly not from wealthy men stepping out of luxury cars. She unlocked the door to her small apartment and immediately heard running footsteps. A second later, a little girl appeared in the hallway and wrapped her arms tightly around her waist. "Mom." Rachel smiled despite the weight she carried. "Hey, sweetheart." Mia Turner was 9 years old, energetic, curious, and easily the brightest part of Rachel's life. The moment Rachel saw her daughter, some of the sadness from earlier began to fade. Not disappear, but soften. "How was school?" Rachel asked. "Good. I got an A on my science project." Mia grinned proudly. Rachel knelt and hugged her again. "I knew you would." As mother and daughter moved into the kitchen, Mia immediately noticed something was wrong. Children often did. "You look tired." Rachel forced a smile. "Long day." Mia accepted the answer, but not completely. She had heard those words many times before. After dinner, Rachel helped her daughter finish homework before tucking her into bed. Once Mia finally fell asleep, Rachel returned to the kitchen table and placed the envelope in front of her. For several minutes, she simply stared at it. The same envelope, the same documents, the same problem that seemed impossible to solve. Slowly, she opened it again. Pages covered with official notices slid onto the table. Numbers, deadlines, warnings. Rachel closed her eyes. She already knew every word by heart. Looking at them again changed nothing. Across the city, Ethan sat alone in his penthouse apartment overlooking Chicago's skyline. He should have been reviewing business reports. Instead, he found himself thinking about Rachel. The image of her standing beside his car refused to leave his mind. He remembered the tears she tried to hide, the way she protected the envelope, the exhaustion in her eyes. Most people spent years trying to impress him. Rachel had spent their entire conversation trying to leave. Oddly enough, that only made him more curious. The next morning, life continued as usual. Ethan attended meetings, signed contracts, reviewed expansion plans. Yet something felt different. During lunch, he caught himself staring out the window instead of listening to a presentation. His assistant noticed immediately. "Everything okay?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Just distracted." Back at her apartment, Rachel rushed through another busy morning. She dropped Mia off at school before heading to work. Throughout the day, she smiled politely at customers and coworkers, hiding her worries the same way she always did. Nobody would have guessed that every spare moment brought her thoughts back to the envelope waiting at home. That afternoon, as school ended, Mia sat on a bench outside the building waiting for her mother. While other children left with parents, she patiently watched the parking lot. Eventually, Rachel arrived, slightly out of breath from running late. Mia smiled and grabbed her hand. Neither noticed the expensive black SUV. Stopped briefly across the street. Ethan had been driving to another meeting when he accidentally recognized Rachel walking with a little girl. He slowed for only a moment before traffic forced him onward. Yet in that brief glimpse, one important piece of the mystery finally became clear. Rachel was not alone. She was a mother. And suddenly, the story behind the envelope felt even more important than before. For the next several days, Ethan found himself paying attention to details he normally would have ignored. He did not know Rachel well enough to call her a friend, yet he could not forget the sadness he had seen in her eyes. More importantly, he could not forget the little girl holding her hand outside the school. The discovery changed everything. Whatever burden Rachel was carrying no longer affected only her. A child was part of the story too. Meanwhile, Rachel focused on surviving one day at a time. Every morning followed the same routine. Wake up early. Prepare breakfast. Get Mia ready for school. Work a full shift. Return home. Help with homework. Pretend everything was fine. Then, after Mia went to sleep, sit at the kitchen table staring at the envelope she still had not solved. One Thursday evening, Rachel opened the envelope again. The papers inside were beginning to show signs of wear from being handled so often. Her eyes moved across the familiar pages. Official notices. Deadlines. Amounts she could not easily manage. She stopped reading and looked toward Mia's bedroom. A soft light glowed beneath the door. Rachel smiled sadly. Her daughter was probably reading one more chapter before sleep. That simple thought gave her strength. No matter how difficult things became, Mia always remained the reason she kept moving forward. The next afternoon brought an unexpected surprise. Mia's school hosted a small community event where local businesses and families gathered for activities and fundraising. Rachel almost skipped it because of work, But after seeing how excited Mia was, she rearranged her schedule and attended. The school gymnasium buzzed with conversation and laughter. Children ran between activity tables while parents watched proudly from the sidelines. Rachel felt grateful for a few hours without worrying about paperwork or deadlines. Then she froze. Standing across the room, near one of the fundraising booths, was Ethan Brooks. He looked just as surprised to see her. For a second, neither moved. Then Ethan smiled and walked over. "I guess Chicago is smaller than I thought." Rachel laughed softly. Apparently, before either could say more, Mia appeared carrying a handmade craft project. "Mom, look what I made." Rachel turned toward her daughter. "That is beautiful." Mia noticed Ethan standing nearby and offered a polite smile. "Hi." Ethan smiled back. "Hi." Rachel quickly introduced them. "Mia, this is Ethan." The little girl shook his hand with surprising confidence. "Nice to meet you." Ethan could not help smiling. "Nice to meet you too." As Mia hurried off to show her project to a teacher, Ethan glanced at Rachel. "She seems amazing." Rachel's expression softened immediately. "She is." The pride in her voice was impossible to miss. For the next few minutes, they talked casually while watching the event. Yet Ethan noticed something. Every time Rachel thought nobody was looking, her attention drifted toward the same envelope tucked carefully inside her bag. Whatever was inside still haunted her, still controlled her thoughts, still followed her everywhere she went. Ethan did not ask about it. Not yet. But as he watched Rachel cheering for her daughter during a school activity, one thing became increasingly clear. The mystery inside that envelope was not simply a financial problem or an inconvenience. It was something capable of stealing peace from a woman who deserved far better. And soon, the truth would begin revealing itself. The school event unexpectedly became the beginning of something neither Rachel nor Ethan anticipated. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed several more times. Sometimes it was a brief conversation after a community fundraiser. Other times it was a chance encounter at a neighborhood coffee shop near Mia's school. None of the meetings felt forced. They simply happened. And with each conversation, Ethan learned a little more about the woman behind the tears he had witnessed that night. Rachel was intelligent, hardworking, and fiercely devoted to her daughter. She rarely spoke about herself, but she could talk about Mia for hours. Every achievement, every dream, every challenge in her daughter's life seemed to matter deeply to her. Ethan admired that. The more he watched Rachel interact with Mia, the more respect he felt for her. Yet despite the growing friendship, one thing never changed. The envelope remained. Ethan occasionally noticed it tucked into her bag, resting on a passenger seat, or sitting beside her during moments when she thought nobody was paying attention. It had become a silent character in their story. One evening, after a school fundraiser meeting, Rachel and Ethan found themselves walking toward the parking lot together. The autumn air carried a chill, and the sun had already disappeared below the horizon. For a while, they talked about ordinary things. Mia's latest science project, a local charity event, weekend plans. Then Rachel suddenly became quiet. Ethan noticed immediately. Her attention had drifted toward a message on her phone. Whatever she read caused the familiar shadow to return to her expression. The same sadness he had seen beside his car weeks earlier. "Bad news?" Ethan asked gently. Rachel hesitated. "Nothing I cannot handle." Ethan almost smiled. That answer had become her favorite defense. "Nothing I cannot handle." He had heard it many times. The problem was that he no longer believed it. Not because Rachel was weak. Quite the opposite. She was so determined to handle everything alone that she rarely admitted when something hurt. "You know," Ethan said carefully, "sometimes strong people are allowed to ask for help." Rachel looked away. Maybe. She sighed softly. When you spend years solving every problem yourself, it becomes difficult to stop. The honesty surprised both of them. For a moment, Rachel seemed as though she might say more. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. Ethan noticed the corner of the envelope visible inside. Again, the mystery appeared. Again, it seemed ready to reveal itself. Then Rachel shook her head. "I am sorry. I should go." Ethan nodded, though disappointment lingered beneath the gesture. He was not disappointed because she refused to explain. He was disappointed because he could see how heavily the burden weighed on her. Later that night, Rachel sat alone at her kitchen table after Mia had gone to bed. The apartment was quiet except for the ticking of a wall clock. Slowly, She removed the documents from the envelope once again. This time, however, she did not immediately look away. Her eyes moved across every page, every deadline, every warning, every reminder of the hardest year of her life. The truth was becoming impossible to avoid. Rachel had spent months trying to solve the situation alone, but time was running out, and somewhere deep inside, she was beginning to wonder whether carrying everything by herself was no longer an option. The truth finally came out on a cold November evening. Rachel had spent months keeping it hidden, convincing herself that if she worked harder, worried less, and sacrificed more, she could somehow solve everything alone. But some burdens eventually become too heavy to carry in silence. That evening, Ethan received a call from Rachel. The moment he heard her voice, he knew something was wrong. She sounded exhausted, not physically tired, but emotionally drained in a way he had never heard before. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. Less than an hour later, they sat across from each other in a small coffee shop that was nearly empty. Rain tapped softly against the windows. For several moments, Rachel stared at the envelope resting on the table between them, the same envelope that had followed her through every chapter of their growing friendship. Finally, she pushed it toward him. "I am tired of pretending everything is okay." Ethan said nothing. He simply listened. Rachel opened the envelope and removed the documents. For the first time, she allowed someone else to see them. The papers revealed months of financial notices connected to medical debt. Ethan read quietly while Rachel spoke. A year earlier, Mia had experienced a serious health scare that required extensive treatment and follow-up care. Thankfully, Mia had fully recovered and was now healthy, active, and thriving. But the medical expenses left behind had overwhelmed Rachel's finances. Insurance covered part of the costs, but not enough. Since then, Rachel had worked extra shifts, sold personal belongings, depleted her savings, and sacrificed nearly everything she could think of in order to keep up. "I never told anyone," Rachel admitted. "I was embarrassed." Ethan looked up. "Why?" Rachel laughed bitterly. "Because everyone expects adults to have answers, especially parents." Her eyes filled with tears. "I kept thinking if I just worked harder, I could fix it." For the first time, Ethan understood why she had been crying beside his car, why the envelope seemed impossible to put down, why she looked exhausted every time he saw her. This was not simply about money. It was about fear. Fear of failing her daughter. Fear of losing stability. Fear of admitting she could not solve everything alone. Rachel wiped away tears and continued. "The worst part was never the bills." Ethan listened carefully. "What was it?" Rachel looked toward the window. "Missing time with Mia, because I was always working." The answer broke his heart. Every late shift, every extra hour, every canceled weekend. They had all been sacrifices made for someone she loved. Rachel lowered her eyes. "I miss school events, family dinners, simple moments." And she never complained. Ethan sat quietly for several seconds. His admiration for Rachel grew even stronger. She was not weak. She was one of the strongest people he had ever met. The strongest because she had carried all of this without asking anyone to rescue her. As the rain continued outside, Rachel finally exhaled a breath that seemed trapped inside her for months. The secret was no longer hers alone. And for the first time since the hardest year of her life began, she did not feel completely alone. When Rachel finally finished telling the truth, silence settled between them. Not an uncomfortable silence, but the kind that appears when something important has finally been spoken aloud. Ethan looked down at the stack of documents on the table and then back at Rachel. He could see the relief in her eyes, even through the exhaustion. Carrying the secret alone had been its own burden. Sharing it had not solved the problem, but it had made the weight a little lighter. "Rachel," Ethan said gently, "you have been fighting this battle by yourself for far too long." Rachel gave a tired smile. "I did not know any other way." Ethan nodded slowly. He understood more than she realized. Success had taught him many things, but one lesson stood above the rest. People often suffered most when they believed asking for help meant failing. "You know what I see?" he asked. Rachel looked up. "What?" "I see a mother who did everything possible to protect her daughter." Rachel immediately looked away. Compliments made her uncomfortable, especially when they touched the sacrifices she rarely discussed. "I made mistakes too," she said quietly. "Everybody does." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "The difference is that most people would have quit long before reaching this point. You did not." Rachel felt emotion rising again. Not because of the debt, not because of the stress, but because someone finally understood what the past year had cost her. The conversation continued long after their coffee had grown cold. Ethan never offered pity. He never treated her like a victim. Instead, he asked questions. Practical questions. Questions nobody else had taken the time to ask. What payment options had she explored? Which programs had she contacted? What resources were available? By the end of the discussion, several possibilities had emerged that Rachel had never considered. Not because they were impossible to find, but because she had been too overwhelmed to see them. For the first time in months, she felt something unfamiliar. Hope. A few days later, Ethan invited Rachel to lunch. She almost declined out of habit. Then she remembered her promise to stop carrying everything alone. During the meeting, Ethan introduced her to a trusted financial advisor who specialized in helping families navigate complicated situations. The advisor reviewed her documents and immediately identified several programs, restructuring options, and assistance resources that could reduce much of the pressure. Rachel sat stunned as possibilities appeared where she had only seen dead ends. "Why did nobody tell me this before?" she asked. The advisor smiled kindly. "Sometimes people simply need the right information." As the weeks passed, progress slowly began replacing panic. The debt did not magically disappear. The challenges remained real. But for the first time, there was a plan, a realistic path forward. More importantly, Rachel no longer felt trapped. One Saturday afternoon, she and Mia spent several hours at a local park instead of working extra shifts or worrying about paperwork. As Mia laughed while chasing leaves across the grass, Rachel realized something. She was smiling without forcing it. Nearby, Ethan watched from a distance after arriving to join them for a community charity event. Seeing Rachel laugh with her daughter felt more rewarding than any business deal he had completed that year. The woman he met crying beside his car was still there. The strength, the determination, the love for her daughter. But now something else had returned as well. The belief that the future could be brighter than the past. And Ethan knew that this was only the beginning. Winter gradually gave way to spring, and for the first time in more than a year, Rachel felt as though she could finally breathe again. The financial plan created with the advisor was working. The overwhelming stack of notices that once kept her awake at night had been replaced by manageable goals and steady progress. Nothing happened overnight, but every month brought a little more stability. More importantly, it brought something she had nearly lost. Time. Time to attend Mia's school events. Time to share dinners without rushing. Time to sit together on the couch and listen to her daughter talk about dreams for the future. One Saturday morning, Rachel stood in the kitchen making pancakes while Mia excitedly described a science competition she wanted to enter. The apartment felt different now. Lighter. Warmer. Filled with laughter instead of worry. As Rachel watched her daughter smile, she remembered the woman who had stood crying beside a black sedan months earlier. She barely recognized that version of herself. Later, that afternoon, Rachel and Mia attended a community charity event in a city park. Families filled the open green spaces while children played beneath clear blue skies. Ethan arrived shortly after they did. Over the months, his friendship with Rachel had become one of the most important relationships in her life. He never tried to solve every problem for her. He never treated her like someone who needed rescuing. Instead, he believed in her when she struggled to believe in herself. That difference meant everything. Mia spotted him first and ran over with a huge smile. "You made it," she said. Ethan laughed. "I would not miss it." The three spent the afternoon together, talking, laughing, and enjoying the beautiful weather. At one point, Mia wandered off to join a group activity nearby, leaving Rachel and Ethan sitting alone on a picnic blanket. For a few moments, they simply watched the children playing. "Do you ever think about that night?" Rachel asked quietly. Ethan smiled. "The night beside my car." Rachel nodded. "I almost walked away before you reached me." Ethan looked out across the park. "I almost kept walking too." Both laughed softly at the thought. Then Rachel grew serious. "Thank you." Ethan turned toward her. "For what?" Rachel's eyes filled with gratitude. "For seeing me when I felt invisible." Ethan was silent for a moment. "You were never invisible, Rachel. You were just carrying too much alone." The words settled gently between them. Nearby, Mia waved enthusiastically from across the field. Rachel smiled and waved back. Then she looked at Ethan again. In that moment, she realized something important. The canceled blind date, the tears, the envelope, the struggles, and every difficult step afterward had led here. Not to perfection, not to a fairy tale, but to something real. Trust, friendship, hope, and perhaps the beginning of something even deeper. As the afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the grass, Mia ran back, carrying a drawing she had just completed. She proudly showed it to them. The picture featured 3 smiling people standing together beneath a bright sky. "That is us," she announced. Rachel and Ethan exchanged amused glances. Then they looked back at the drawing. For the first time in a very long time, the future no longer felt frightening. It felt full of possibility. And sometimes, that is the greatest gift life can give.